So inflation is impacting global economies, at this time. How is it impacting supply chain, in Nigeria? Because some would say it's supply chain issues that are stoking inflation.
Absolutely. I think the global economy is trying to kind of grapple the situation right now. But it's actually, we expected this. We expected this actually from the U.S. perspective, with all the money pumped into the system, the infrastructure bill, the COVID bill, and most of the countries around the world pump so much money into the system. So at some point, there will be, most of the causes of inflation is too much of their money in the market, and so the government has to figure out a way to mop up that money within the system once the demand and supply kind of stabilizes over the course of time. So one of the things that we are seeing right now that the government is using the tools, the interest rate to kind of mop up. But Nigerian situation is quite different because prior to COVID-19, Nigeria has been grappling with inflation, and most of these things has to do with the economic, philosophy, and oftentimes the economic situation of the country. So Nigeria has a compounded inflationary issues. I think we also already way into the double digits last time I checked. And I don't think anything is going to happen in the nearest future now with the political season coming up and all insecurity that is plaguing most of the supply chains in the country. So I don't see this thing relenting until we have a different government in place and we have a different economic perspective, because this current economic perspective has kind of have a terminal hand at some point once the new government comes in next year. But depending on whoever the new government is will determine what kind of trajectory the economy is going to go further. But as it seems right now, we're going to continue to see the fall in dollar. And so Nigeria is really going through a lot.
That's in the naira.
A lot. And what do you say?
Yeah. No, I said the fall in the naira.
Absolutely. The fall in the naira is really affecting most of the commodities across the board. And I really do feel for a lot of folks that are actually trading commodities because it's not been fair to them. And unfortunately, I'm not a prophet of doom. I can tell you it's going to get worse before it gets better. So with the global economy, which Nigeria is quite nested in it, is also having some community issues right now. At least since I was born, the U.S. hasn't seen this kind of inflationary rate. And until things stabilizes, until we have some kind of concession in the Russia and Ukraine prices, until some of these dollars has been mopped off the market and some of these contracts that have been for infrastructure bill in the U.S. has been executed, I don't see any of these things coming down.
That's a lot of dollars that needs to be mopped up, at this time. But in what ways can procurement leaders, address, high inflation and alleviate associated pressures?
It's too late to be given any tips on that right now, Ladi, because oftentimes these supposed to have been done prior. When you edge, one of the things we've done, one of the things that we know as procurement specialists, especially if you're on the supply chain, is to be able to edge against inflation. And one of the things you do edge against inflation has a cost to it as well, is to kind of, put in, if you're actually having on contracts, you'll be able to kind of put those kind of inflationary rates into your contract in such a way and in such a manner that there's any increase in commodity, those things can actually, your contract is flexible in that sense. And also, you also have to store, to hedge against inflation. But the thing about storing against inflation is the fact that you don't know how long this inflation is going to take. So in a sense of storage, in the sense of increasing your inventory to hedge against inflation, there is also an inventory holding cost that comes with it as well. So that could be, so you have to look at it, okay, what are the percentage of inflation and what I'm trying to hedge against, and also how much of the inventory holding cost, and you balance all those percentages and see if you come out in the positive or the negative side. So those are the two major ones. But as you see right now, is to continue to kind of not to hold back, especially for procurement specialists or procurement professionals, is not to buy too much material and try to just do as much as necessary to kind of make your organization stay afloat, because you don't want to buy too much right now and then inflation comes down and then you have a lot of product in price that you have to make up with it, which over time you're going to take a lot of loss. You're going to take a lot of losses on your books. So those are the 2 or 3 tips I can offer procurement professionals at this particular point in time. Especially, it's too late to be hedging against inflation right now.
Too late.
At
Too
least
late
for
to
folks in
hedge.
the US, some of them can get ahead of time. They can hedge against inflation, but we're already in the midst of inflation. The best we could do is to reduce the amount of a lot of product that we are buying, and more importantly, is to actually kind of see and kind of put those inflationary rates in our contract as we buy a lot of these commodities in such a way that any fluctuation in prices doesn't affect you as well. Because oftentimes some people are locked in some prices and they won't be able to deliver because of inflationary rates.
Right, and another issue is getting the raw materials here. You know, what are the alternatives for companies struggling with high costs of getting some of these raw materials?
Yeah, it's and let's use Nigeria as a prime example. Nigeria is an isolated example right now because of insecurity in itself, and that is going to be huge. Price of getting raw material is going to be quadrupling, and obviously there are certain things that you can do. This particular one, you do your best to, first of all, you have to actually get this material safely first. And the price of getting material, especially in Nigeria, from what I checked last, has quadrupled over the course of time. 70% of the cost of every commodity that are coming out of any nation, I think Nigeria is even probably actually much, is about 80% of cost of every commodity is attributed to logistic costs. And that is huge, especially in this kind of era. So Nigeria zoned, logistical cost of a price 80%. And this can be attributed to, inflationary rates, insecurity, high security. And I think high security has attributed to 5% increase as well. So I will always encourage people in this particular situation right now, to source locally to the best of their ability, so that you can reduce the amount of cost. For the most part, it's not going to be that much, but at least you have sustaining ability to sustain, product going through your pipeline rather than having to wait. And oftentimes the waiting can come in. Did you know how much companies have suffered a lot because they couldn't get a lot of product into their pipelines to produce their raw material? So a lot of people are now going into nearshoring because getting produce has been quite difficult. We have Russian war going on. We have sub-Sahara insecurity, U.S., whatever is going on in the world, Asia, the new road, all these trading embargoes and all these sanctions.
Quite a number of headwinds there. Quite a number of headwinds.
So there's so much going on in the world. So the best way you can do, and unfortunately, they're kind of, we're kind of becoming a pariah economy. A lot of people are more into regionalization right now. What we know as globalization is now coming into what we call regionalization. So that's why Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is coming at the right time for Africa to start trading with each other, to be able to, at least some. But
how is that going? How is that going at this time?
At least from my forecastle to yours, there's a lot of traction. There's a lot of policy has to be made. When you have the Africa Free Trade Agreement, as we know, is supposed to be the largest trading bloc in the world, supposed to take, the likes of the former NAFTA and EUs and whatnot. But for that to actually be executed, we need a particular, a platform, just like we have in the EU and in the US as well, a strong platform to be able to adjudicate a lot of these issues that's going to come along the way. And I've yet to see that one out of African Union. I've been working with a lot of all these governmental parastatals, all these parastatals across African countries that are going to be working on this. And I think until we see a clear function, a clear picture of how this is going to look, it's going to be very hard to predict how this thing is going to go. For what we've seen on paper so far and how the trade is going to go, I think is quite promising. But it's a lot to have 50 plus countries in Africa with different ideologies, different political ideologies, very economical ideologies. We're colonized by different nations
and currencies too.
Africa, and how these things to be able to transpire. So it's going to be very interesting from my perspective. But at least so far so good on the policy hand. We just need a body that's going to control all this, because without a body, it's going to be very difficult. Because imagine Nigeria saying, you know what, I'm going to just do my own thing. How does that affect other countries that are passing through goods and services, that are using Nigeria as a pass-through for their movement of goods and services? Because we have a lot of landlocked countries in Africa where they have to use some kind of ports, especially in Nigeria, to pass through those things. So all these things has to be fine-tuned and has to
so much to actually factor in, and also currency issues too, for the bloc. But some professionals have talked, that said organizations, responding to high inflation by actually increasing their supply chain resilience. And I'm wondering, how do you do that?
So when you increase your supply chain resilience, so resiliency and risk management are two-sided coin. So for you to understand supply chain resiliency and supply chain risk management, you have to have one in the boat. So for you to understand supply chain risk management, so once you understand resilience, you have to understand your supply chain risk management. So let me kind of answer that question from the perspective of supply chain risk management. So when you talk about resiliency, you can only be resilient if you can actually manage your risk. So what they're actually referring to is increasing supply chain resiliency into understanding what your risk factors are. So over the time, supply chain, this is my area of specialization, so I can talk all day on this. So when you're talking about supply chain risk management, it is about understanding the risk, understanding the probability and the impact of those risks on it. So in this part of the situation, as we continue to see, a lot of things that we don't see as risks over the course of time, really traditional risk factoring in different businesses have changed over the course of time. A tweet from a customer these days can be a huge risk within your business. So understanding this, and for you to understand the risk, you have to understand the vulnerability within your supply chains. And that is what a lot of people are actually talking about when they're saying increasing those kind of supply chain resiliency, is understanding those vulnerabilities. You understand those vulnerabilities, then you can prepare ahead of it. So for example, this issue of when we went through COVID, we knew ahead of time inflation is coming, recession is coming along the way. So what do? When we're able to have the visibility across different supply chains, either local or global, we'll be able to hedge against those risks. And that's what they mean by having a supply chain resilience, is by looking at those vulnerabilities and those critical points along your supply chain. And that's been very difficult over the course of time. So with the use of technology, you can actually have a clear view across your supply chain. You know who is supporting who, and on the line, who are the touch points, what are the touch points along your supply chain, who is touching my supply chain at any given point, and then you can actually look at those vulnerabilities and plug those vulnerabilities in as necessary. So by doing that, you are actually increasing your supply chain resiliency, so you can actually match, but you might not be able to understand the risk to a large extent, but at least the supply, and let me make this statement before I close out on this point. What we saw over COVID is this, because a lot of people do not have supply chain resiliency, a lot of supply chains were broken. So when you actually understand supply chain resiliency and you're able to block those vulnerabilities, you might not be able to do it to a large extent. You might not know all the necessary risks involved. But what is going to happen is whatever is coming is going to stretch your supply chain, but it's not going to break it. And it's easier for you to contract your supply chain than to actually start sewing up together if it's broken.
Right. All right. All right, Adeboye Adeleke, we'll have to leave it there now. So much to unpack there. Adeboye Adeleke is the founder of Supply Chain Africa. It was great having your perspective on the show today.
Thank you so much, Ladi. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.